Okay, I couldn't get it to flip. All right, are we on? Okay, so it's going to take a second for it'll alert people to let them know. Oh, people are on. Hi. Okay, so hi everybody. Thank you so much for coming tonight. Thank you on Periscope for joining us tonight. We are talking about digestion, and there's some new insights into the world of digestion and how it doesn't just live in our gut anymore when we're talking about that. So I do have a live audience in front of me, so if I'm not actually looking at the screen, it's not because I'm trying to be rude, or I just am trying to address the people that are also in front of me. And if you have questions, feel free to start asking them. And if I don't see them, keep asking them, because sometimes it's hard for me to look at the screen and then be talking to people and then wait, that just like went away. So thank you so much for joining. I'm actually really excited about this workshop. We did this workshop last year, and I usually don't want to repeat any workshops, but it was my largest attendance workshop, and people that weren't able to make it have been asking me questions and questions about it again. So I figured, well, why not jump on and we'll talk about digestion today, and then we'll talk about some of the new things that have come into play with it, and we'll see how that all wraps up for all of us today. So thank you everybody for coming today. And if you have any questions, we can talk about that at the end. If you have any questions on Periscope, just pop them up as we go. And say hello and where you're from, so I know that we're not in this by ourselves. And let's get into it. So my name is Shanna Cartmel, and I am a nutritionist and a holistic health practitioner. And what we do in our practice is chiropractic, massage, as well as really all over body care. And the reason we put on these workshops that are free every month are because we want to let people know that you can take care of your health and you can gain control of your health and do it in a more natural way. Western medicine is inundated with doctor visits, and they're, hi South Carolina, Western medicine is inundated with doctor visits now, and people are drugged up. So we figure, why are we going to be living like that? And we need to turn that around. So one of the ways that we're going to do that today is we're going to talk about our digestion. So Digestion 101, but really it's Digestion 2.0 because we've got some newer insights to talk with you about. So thank you everybody that is here today. I really appreciate you coming. Thank you for jumping on to Periscope. Okay, so let's get into it. So I shared with you a little bit about who I am, but really I'm passionate about talking with people about their health. I'm passionate with sharing how people can better themselves and how we can do a lot of that through the foods that we eat. There are going to be cases where our body is inundated and it needs to be released, or we need to be toxin free. And so there are things that you can do to support that, and a lot of times it's going to be herbs rather than your mainstream prescription medication. So we'll talk a little bit about that today. And then we're going to talk about some different things. So let's just jump right on into it. So our gut really is its own system in our body. We talk about our gut instinct when we make decisions in life. We say, well, I had a gut feeling about this or about that. And they also say that our gut has its own brain. And when we talk about digestion, we talk about things that go on in our body. A lot of times you're hearing in the mainstream media nowadays, everything's about the gut. People are talking about the gut like nobody's talked about the gut before. But the gut has been in our bodies since the beginning of time, and Hippocrates actually talked about the gut and homeostasis in our body being in full health if we get right with our gut. So even though it's something that is now what's being talked about in the mainstream media, and a lot of health practitioners are talking about it, the reality is that our gut has been who we are and what we are in our health for as long as we've been around. And the great thing about that is now people are recognizing it and they're wanting to do something about it, and so that's what we're doing here today. So there are strong emotional qualities tied into our gut feelings. We talked about our gut instinct, and it's no surprise that our decline in our health actually started at the beginning of penicillin. When penicillin was invented, it saved many lives, and we're not ever going to negate that. However, people then were getting prescription medication, antibiotics for everything under the sun, and we still see it today. We see kids that are on antibiotics for ear infections when they don't need to be on an antibiotic for an ear infection. So what happens is that the body starts getting used to these antibiotics, and then the body doesn't work anymore with the antibiotics, but it also brings down the flora in our gut. And so in our gut we have good bacteria, and then we also have bad bacteria. And when the bad bacteria is being treated with medication, the good bacteria also loses out because of that. So we have things that start to happen in our body. And let me see if you guys can see this. Let me see if I can turn this. Okay, so these are common symptoms that people feel when our gut is not in the place that it should be. So this is a checklist, you could say, for something that you want to do. So if you have frequent heartburn, if you have belching, common belching is after you're finished eating, or even during eating if you begin to belch. Gas, nobody likes that. Constipation, diarrhea, and bloating, if you can see that down there. So what do we say these? These are all yuck. The reason why we have these is because our gut is not able to digest the foods that we're eating, but also because of the acidity in our stomach, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Let's see where I am here. Okay, so when we are born, we actually receive the beginnings of our gut health when we go through the birth canal. And unfortunately, in this day and age, we see a lot of C-sections. So when a child is born through a cesarean section, they are not receiving the immediate gut that they're going to carry through for the rest of their lives. Now, it also goes into play with how well the mom's gut is and how healthy the mom is, but there will always be something that the baby gets when it's going through the birth canal and it's being born. I mean, essentially, it just swallows the bacteria in the canal, and then that's how it starts its bacteria in its gut, and that's awesome. However, if you're born through a C-section, you don't get that. And you still do get some benefit, especially if you start breastfeeding through nursing, you will get benefit, but you're not getting the immediate benefit. So children that are born today through cesarean section are already in a negative state with their gut health. And we're seeing more and more when children are born, you see symptoms like colic, acid indigestion, GERD. Those are common symptoms that children are having. But just because they're common doesn't make them normal. And just because it happens to a lot of children doesn't mean it's something that children should be going through. So we want to address that early on in a child's life. And then we also want to address a woman that wants to be pregnant or that is pregnant, making sure that we're building up her gut, whether she's going to have a baby or she's already in the process, to then promote, one, to promote a vaginal birth, and two, to promote the health of the child going through the birth process. So something that I actually just learned in a seminar recently is if a child, and there are always cases for people to have a cesarean section. It's not just for people to choose what they want to have the birth be on a certain day, or sometimes people say, well, my doctor's going on vacation, I want to ensure that I have my doctor. But there are always going to be those scenarios where a child has to be born through cesarean section. And in that instant, you can talk to your doctor about actually inserting his gloved hand into your vagina and then scooping some of your, just kind of rubbing it along the inside, and then putting that into the baby's mouth at birth. And that essentially will give the baby their immediate gut flora to go into their stomach. So it's probably an embarrassing conversation to have with your doctor if you are planning to have a C-section or not planning to have a C-section, but saying, in the case that we do have one, this is what my wishes are. That's a conversation that you have to have, but if it's for the health of your child, you're going to want to have that conversation anyways. So, okay, so when we talk about our digestive system, okay, so this is how the digestion process works. When we initiate, we're actually smelling foods or seeing foods, and at the very basic of tasting foods, we're actually starting our digestive system and our digestion process. So it starts there. Then it goes into our mouth, so we're chewing foods, or called masticating foods, and then that's where we get our initial breakdown on foods. Then we have where it goes into our esophagus, which is our throat, and drops down. And then it goes into the stomach. And I'm going to show you a diagram on this in a minute, but I just want to show you the basics for right now. And then we have our small intestine, our pancreas, our liver, our gallbladder, our large intestine, and then through our rectum. So this is the digestion process in full. But we're going to actually go into that with my wonderful artwork here. Okay. I think a 5-year-old could draw this better than me, but here we go. Okay, so you begin to chew your foods and you swallow, and foods are in their basic broken down pieces. So you're obviously not eating a piece of steak whole. You put a piece of food in your mouth, you start to chew it, break it down into smaller pieces, and then you swallow it. So it drops down through the esophagus. It drops through the esophageal sphincter, which is kind of like a door that opens and shuts. It's a muscle, and it opens and shuts, and then it drops down into the stomach. Once it's in the stomach here, it starts to get broken down even more. So we need acids in the stomach to break down the foods that we eat, because the foods that we eat that are larger pieces, they can't pass through the stomach in those larger pieces. The only way we can break them down is if we have a very acidic environment. So the more acidic our stomach is, the healthier our body is overall together. So we have where we drop food drops down, and ideally we want to have a 1.5 pH stomachs, which again is very acidic. So we're aiming for 1.5. However, if you have those symptoms that we talked about earlier, the gas, the belching, the acid indigestion, the reflux, the heartburn, those are all symptoms that your stomach is not at a 1.5. So you already know, you don't have to test your stomach, you already know if you have those symptoms, or you eat foods that cause the symptoms, then you already know that your stomach is not at a 1.5. So right then and there, you already know that you're not where you should be in your health status. Okay, so as we break down foods, we want it to break down into something that looks like a mulch. Now, when we don't have that 1.5 environment, the stomach can't do its job, so we don't break down the foods that we're eating. So the food then sits in your stomach, and essentially it festers. And as it's sitting in your stomach, it starts to putrefy, or basically go bad, and it creates its own gases. These gases then begin to push up on the esophageal sphincter right here, and this is where people get the acid reflux or the heartburn or the indigestion, because this muscle, it'd be like me asking everybody to flex your muscles really hard and just leave it there for a really long time, and you'd be like, oh my gosh, I can do this, but then I can't do it for a really long time. This is a muscle as well, and this muscle then opens up, and then it goes in. You know what? I'm sorry, I had to block this person. Okay. I don't mind a good comment, but that one's rude. Okay. All right, so when this muscle breaks down, or it can't hold its strength anymore, then basically the door opens back up, and then you have where you have the acid reflux, or even the belching that comes up. So when you start to get that, then you know that because this isn't breaking down, what's happening on the rest of your body, the lower half of your body, is basically now being stopped up like a drain, because everything is supposed to be moving through our body freely, like what the 405 traffic should be, but it really isn't. So when this happens, it will then sit down here in the lower part of the stomach, and it wants to make the pass through. But now you have another muscle called the pylorus sphincter. Now this muscle won't open up. Here's the great thing about our body and the miracles of our body, is that this muscle right here will not open up until this food is broken down into small enough pieces that it can pass through into the small intestine. So again, this muscle will stay. Now if the food is trying to push through, let's say you had a meal and now that food is sitting there and it's putrefying, and then you go and you have another meal, eventually your stomach is filling up and it has to go somewhere. So it's trying to break the foods down. So when you support your body by having a pH of a stomach that works that way, it works very efficiently. When you don't support your body, you get all the symptoms, and then unfortunately what happens is people will start to take antacids, or they'll go and they'll get a prescription strength, which is horrifying in what it's doing to your body because it's anti-acid. And we're here talking about how much we want the stomach to be acidic. So there's a difference between eating acidic foods, like cooked foods, and there's a difference between having an acidic environment naturally. The way that we have acidic environment naturally is in a healthy process. So when you're eating acidic foods and it's not going anywhere, it's not acidifying your stomach, that's when it's breaking down and it's putrefying. Okay, so let me just check my notes real fast to make sure we're on the same place. Okay, so once food breaks down and it becomes kind of like a mulch, it's like if you were gardening in your garden, you could pick up the pieces and you could crumble them, or if you've ever used a juicer, the pulp that's left behind, that's what the food starts to look like. But your body hasn't absorbed anything from that yet, so it's still usable food. Then the sphincter to the duodenum, which is the small intestines, opens up. Now here we see that it has to be a 4.0 pH. So if we're going from a 1.5 to a 4.0, the job of the duodenum is to raise up the pH, and it does that because that's its job. It's like if you were a delivery person, your job is to deliver something. The job of the duodenum is to raise up the food that comes through. Raise it up. Oh my gosh, why are people so rude? Okay. So their job is to raise it up and to be then it's found to be useful. So if we're in a 1.5 environment, that's great. It goes through into the duodenum. The duodenum says, great, I get to go to work, and it raises the pH up. Now what happens when we're not 1.5? Because most people are not acidic where they need to be. A lot of times people are already at a 4.0 or above. So the food eventually passes through, it goes into the small intestine, and now the small intestine doesn't have a job to do. So if the small intestine doesn't have a job to do, what happens there? The food gets stuck there. It also doesn't pull out the nutrients. This is why our body is pulling out the nutrients for the foods that we eat. So it's not happening in the stomach, it's happening in the small intestine. So if it doesn't have a job to do right there, then it's eventually going to break down the food, but you're slowing the process down again. And so already, here's where we see the main problem in most people in their health today, is that they don't have a low enough pH in their stomach to then have it be raised up again. And this right here is where most people, when they come in to see me, we address that. I don't have to test you for that. I don't have to. We talk about what's happening with your diet and what's happening with your stomach, and that's where we see where people's health is. This poor little diagram here is actually very telling. Okay. All right, so one of the ways to see how your body is functioning is to think of your body as chopped in half. So for one, you've got your upper digestive system, which is your mouth, your esophagus, your stomach, and then just barely dropping into the small intestine. So almost like if you were to take your body and you were to fold in half. The upper half of your body determines the health and the state of the lower half of your body, and the lower state of your body determines the health of the upper state of your body. So for instance, if you deal with diarrhea or constipation, that's happening in the lower intestines, in your lower gut, but the issue is in the upper gut, and that's why. So when we talked about this not bringing the pH up because it doesn't have the job to do, a lot of times you see constipation in people because you're getting the backup in the colon, and it's not efficiently working through. So the colon kind of works like a snake. It's the muscles are always constantly moving, and we have a ton of muscles in our colon. So the small intestine, the large intestine, and so all of that is constantly moving and working. But if it's getting stuck, then it's almost like if you had like a fur ball in your throat, like a cat gets. Nothing can move past that, and eventually it has to come back out again. And that's where you see people with having their dysfunction. Okay, one of the common things that I talk about with people when they come in to see me is I'll say to them, are you allergic to foods? And they'll say no, or they may say yes. And they say, but I tend to stay away from A, B, and C. And so A, B, and C looks like tomato sauce, or A, B, and C looks like, well, I don't eat these types of foods because they cause problems in me, and so I just stay away from them. Dairy tends to be something that people stay away from, even wheat and gluten and things like that. So when they say that to me, I say to them, okay, so do you think then if you stay away from those foods, you've actually healed the problem? And more often than not, I get, yes, I've healed the problem, but you haven't because you're only staying away from it. You're avoiding something so you don't have the symptom, but that never fixed the issue. Just like when somebody goes on a prescription drug for an antacid, I always say to them, great, okay, so your doctor put you on that, how long are you going to be on it for? Because if you're taking a prescription drug, you should be taking that prescription to fix something. Medical doctors and prescription drugs are the only ones that can say we're treating something to cure something. So if you go to your doctor and you say I have this issue, and they treat you by giving you a prescription medication for it, then you should be cured from it at some point. And so I say there's, medication has a place in our world, but that's when you say to the doctor, okay, when am I being treated and when is this going to cure me? And the doctor will look at you like you're nuts because these medications don't cure you of your condition. They just exacerbate it in the long run by keeping it from coming up. So by lowering the pH here, what they're really only doing is lowering the pH in the foods that you eat, as you eat them, but you're not fixing the problem in the stomach. So remember that. And when people come into me and I say to them, okay, so when did your doctor tell you this would cure you? And they too look at me like I'm nuts. That's when I say, wake up. It's time to realize that your health is based on you and your knowledge, not what a doctor tells you to do, because a doctor isn't with you in your life all the time. All right, so moving on. So what we do, okay. All right, so after it moves through the stomach and then it drops down, you have to have that pH shift in order for the duodenum to release bile, and then we go through the liver and the pancreas, and it carries forward, and then it exits through the body. One of my favorite things to tell people, I'll move out of the way so you can see that, is if you want to alkalize the body, alkaline products are very popular these days. Alkaline water is extremely popular. And I say to the people, if you want to alkalize the body, spend your money on acidifying the stomach. If you acidify your gut, you will alkalize your body, and that will give your body overall health. So just remember that. Instead of going and just buying alkaline water, and I'm not negating alkaline water, I just think that rather than spending your monies on drinking, again, something else that's just masking the issue, the alkaline water is not going to acidify your stomach. You have to actually acidify the stomach. So we're seeing some fads in the diet today, and we'll talk about how we'll do that in just a few minutes. But we're seeing some fads in our industry today, and some of them are great, and they're very worthy of what we're doing. However, just like most things that are fads, you have the beginnings, and then you have a lot of people jump on the bandwagon, and then you have what we have today. So for instance, we have an overuse of probiotics. Now, probiotics are very much necessary in our environment today. However, probiotics only work for as long as you're taking them. So if you take a probiotic today, and within 3 days you stop taking a probiotic, all of the effects of that probiotic are gone. So taking a probiotic is supposed to at some point have an end point, and they don't, because people are taking probiotics, but they're not addressing the issue. Because a probiotic isn't going to fix this. A probiotic is simply feeding the flora that's already in the gut. It's not creating new flora. So you have to build up the flora in the gut and then feed it with the probiotic. So when people talk to me about taking probiotics, I say absolutely they have their place, but not today. We're going to use those a little bit later on down the road. Or you can start taking them as we get things going. For people that are really interested in doing that, they can start taking them as you get things going, but I wouldn't just do that. And I think probiotics are like #1 on the market these days for what people are doing. Now there's a difference between a probiotic and a fermented food. So we'll remember that. Again, antacids, those are huge in the industry. I went into a store and I just walked down the antacid aisle and I was blown away. I ended up taking a photo and I couldn't fit the entire section in my camera, and I even did a wide angle, because the entire wall was top to bottom, shelf to shelf, all antacids from everything you can think of. Now I know me, I'm the type of person that thinks, okay, I want to feel better. So when you go and you look on these shelves, you see brand A, and then you see brand A with extra strength. Now, I don't know if you've ever experienced heartburn in your life, but I have, and I've actually, when I was pregnant, I used these brand A's and brand B's. Which one are you going to go for? When you're in pain, are you going to go for brand A, or are you going to go for brand A with extra strength? Because when I'm really hurting, I want to like knock it out. So what happens is people bypass brand A altogether and they go right on over to brand A extra strength. And now they're taking high doses of an antacid that is high dosing the stomach into being at a further place than it should be in the other direction. So remember that with that. Now, kefir and kombucha, those are two fermented foods. If you were part of our Periscope last month, or you were here, we were talking about fermented foods and how those rebuild the gut flora. And what a great product that they are. And you can actually make fermented foods at home, and it is so super simple. And if you missed it, or you were not able to join us, or you weren't able to get on Periscope, it will be up on our YouTube page, I would say by the next week. I had some splicing issues, and it's taken me a while, but it will be up on our YouTube page, which is under Cartmel Chiropractic, and you can find it there. And and I even have recipes for you, so you can figure out how to make them on your own. However, The store brand versions these days, you can still get some great ones, but you have to do a little bit of research, because now what's happening is the whole point of a fermented food is that it's actually fermenting, and it takes a while for this product to be available. Well, when you have a surge of demand, the supply that now needs to be created at a faster pace. So you're seeing some of these kombuchas come out on the market that have a high sugar content to them, and they're not as beneficial as traditional kombucha and kefir. So do a little bit of research. If you find a company that you're interested in, look into it a little bit deeper, and make sure that it's one of the ones that you should be actually using if you're not ready to make one on your own. But kombucha is pretty easy to make, and kefir, you can either get water kefir or you can get the traditional milk-based kefir. All of those work just fine. And if you don't know what kefir is basically like liquid yogurt. So there you go. Okay. All right. So the thing about health and about our gut is that we have to look at our body as a lifetime goal, not a weekender diet. And all too often people come in, and I see it all the time, especially when people come into me with actual ailments. I had somebody come into me once that she needed to have surgery, and the only way her doctor would do the surgery is if she lost a certain amount of weight. And she was in tears, and wholeheartedly, let's just jump right in and let's see what we can do for you and get your body in a better place. Well, then shortly after that, they learned that she doesn't actually need to have the surgery anymore, and she said to me, I'm not ready for you, and I'll see you, in the future. And I welcome her back whenever she is ready. But that's the thing, is people will do things for their health when they're in a dire place. People will do things for their health when they're very motivated to do them. But if you don't have a reason to change your health, most of the time people don't, and that's very sad. So going into looking at our lifestyle, we have to look at it like this isn't something that I'm doing until I get to point B. We have to look at it like this is my life that I'm going to work on, rather than it be a weekend diet or a weekend fad or something along those lines. Okay, so we talked a little bit about this in our last workshop, but I really wanted to stress this because I think this is where most people don't have the knowledge behind it. But what I really wanted to talk to you today about is the new insights that we've learned about digestion and how our body is the most amazing thing ever created. And how when we talk about the gut and we talk about the way that the gut works, and how if you have homeostasis in the gut, then then the rest of your body will be in a place of health as well. But this is why I'm really excited to share this with you. So we're going to talk today not just about what happens when food actually drops down into your stomach and it moves on, but we're going to talk a little bit higher into our bodies, and that's in the mouth. So let me grab some stuff real fast. Put this down. Okay. Are there any, well, we'll do questions later. Are there any questions for anybody down there? If you have any questions, feel free to pop them up. I've had to block some people, so I feel like I'm a little bit tripped up today, but if just pop up a question if you have something, and say hello if you want to. Okay. All right, so let's see. No. Okay, we'll just move on. All right, so when we eat foods, we all have a tongue. Everybody stick out your tongue. Okay, so we all have a tongue. And if you've ever looked at your tongue in the mirror, you see little bumps. We call them taste buds. So everybody knows what their taste buds are. But on our tongue, we actually have something called receptors. So we have known our tongue to be taste buds. However, tonight, every time I talk about our taste, I'm going to talk about taste receptors. Okay, so here we go. So I have a little sign here. So we have 5 tastes. Our tongue recognizes 5 tastes. So, okay. So our tongue recognizes bitter, salty, sweet, sour, and a taste called umami. Now umami is actually savory, and umami is a more recent taste. I'll set that for you guys to see that. Okay. So umami is the newest taste that research has shown that our tongue actually will react to. There are receptors that sense savory foods. So we have bitter, salty, sweet, sour, and then umami. And yes, umami is Japanese. Very good, thank you. Now, they're actually still debating a 6th taste, which is called oleogustus, and oleo is for fat. And so they believe that now when we eat fats, our tongue receptors actually sense that and detect that, but that's all in research. Just so you know, within the last couple of years, this research is on the forefront. So what we know today, probably, and I would say the next 2 years, will be even more forward than this. And what I'm telling you today is things that are just now on the forefront. So our tastes have already been there, but the debating on the 6th taste, that's still new and that's in the works. So as of right now, it's not a taste. But okay, so these different tastes that I shared with you, I'll hold it up one more time. So I'm going to put it. I'm going to put this up here and then it's going to fall, watch. Okay, so these 5 tastes are different tastes that are recognized and detected by those taste receptors that I just mentioned to you. So kind of like our taste buds on our tongues. Now there are actually 2 different types of receptors. So I'm going to try to break this down really easily so it doesn't sound confusing. So just go with it and then it'll all wrap up in the end. So there are 2 types of receptors, and for very easy terms, I'm just going to say that one type of receptors are protein, and then the other one are ion-based. So there's ion-based taste receptors and there's protein-based taste receptors. That really isn't important for anybody else to know unless you're interested in that, but I want to explain that for a reason. So, okay, so the protein. Now, different taste receptors will detect different tastes in our mouth by 2 receptors coming together. So for instance, when it comes to sweet and savory foods, so when it comes to umami and sweet foods, our different receptors in our mouth will sense them and they come together, and those coming together will detect what is sweet and savory. Now here's the cool thing. When we eat something sweet or we eat something savory, we activate 3 taste receptors. Okay, so 3 taste receptors get activated on our tongue when we eat something sweet or savory. When we eat something bitter, we activate 29 taste receptors. I don't know if I feel so geeked out because to hear that, I was like 29 taste receptors. So if we eat something sweet or we eat something savory, 3 little receptors get activated. But when we eat something bitter, 29 taste receptors are activated. Now, when we eat something bitter, usually that's in a plant material. So there's phytochemicals, are what are in the herb that they trigger the receptors in humans. Okay, so it's the phytochemicals in an herb that trigger the receptors in humans. Now, why bitter? Bitter foods are thought to be defensive foods. So because many toxins are bitter, and most toxins are plant origin. So plants themselves are bitter, and then ecologically, plants themselves are bitter to protect themselves. So for instance, like an artichoke, if you walk over to an artichoke, it has little pokey thorns on the tip of it. That protects it as it's growing from any type of predator that would be coming upon the artichoke. So in the plant world itself, they protect themselves. And so when we have bitterness, it's thought to be defensive because, again, toxins are mainly bitter, and most toxins in our environment are of a plant origin. Okay, so we're all on the same page, right? We're all getting that? Okay. Now carnivores, so think your friendly tiger down the street, carnivores have less than 10 receptors because they're meat eaters. They don't need to have these receptors in their mouth, but they have a little bit less than 10. Now birds have between 1 and 5, and I thought this was kind of sad. The pigeon has one taste receptor altogether. The poor little pigeon, 1 receptor. Okay, so just to rematch or to readdress it, when we eat sweet and savory foods, we have 3 taste receptors. When we eat bitter foods, we have how many? 29. Thank you. How many? 29. Okay, so we have 29. Now here's the thing. So phytochemicals are not toxic in human consumable amounts. Okay, so phytochemicals are not toxic in human consumable amounts. So what happens is herbalists actually exploit the opportunity by offering bitter herbs and then the body will react to it as if it were a toxin. But again, phytochemicals are not toxic in human amounts. So even though they're not toxic, the body thinks that they're toxic. It reacts as if it's a toxin, and then we get a beneficial reaction out of it, which is really cool. So our body system eats something bitter. It thinks it has to go on the defense because something is attacking it, and then the body goes on defense, and we actually use that in a beneficial way. I think that's like, I'm totally geeked out, just so you know, learning this and hearing and even sharing this with you guys today. So if you guys get geeked out by anything, let it be that today. So it affects our physiology positively. Okay. If you can't stay any longer, this is going to load up. You can watch it on Periscope for the next 24 hours, and then you can also watch us on our YouTube channel, which is Cartmel Chiropractic, and you can search for this video in the next couple of days. Thanks for joining us. Okay, so bitter compounds powerfully stimulate our gastric juices secretions. So where we have gastric juices, our entire gut system. So once we start swallowing, we have gastric flow in the stomach, and it actually starts to produce the bile that we're going to be creating and needing later on in the rest of our body. Okay, so it powerfully stimulates gastric juices secretions, but it's also a tonic for the whole body. So the things that I'm going to tell you in the next, I'd say 5 minutes, are the newest research that are out there. So for instance, within a year, there was only known 24 taste receptors with bitter foods. Today we know that there's 29. So this information is moving quickly, and it's every day they're coming out with something new. Okay, so where am I? Of course, I'm going to lose all my stuff. Okay, so bitter herbs also improve our appetite, but then they improve satiation, so satiety. So for instance, when you eat, you want to have an appetite to actually eat, and as we age, our appetite tends to go down. Our appetite tends to go down. So we want to improve that. We want to have an appetite, and unfortunately when people aren't hungry, then they tend to not eat foods, or they eat very little foods, and they tend to not be the healthiest state of foods. So we want to improve our appetite, but then you think if you're improving your appetite, are you going to keep continuing to eat? But you don't. You actually eat less foods, but a better appetite when eating it. So you'll tend to reach for better foods when doing so. Okay, then we also promote better circulation in our abdominal organs by eating bitter herbs and bitter foods, because it's by creating the gastric and by creating the juices flowing, you're promoting circulation. We also have a toning effect on the colon, which is, this right here is really good information, because for people that suffer from diarrhea or constipation, and it's part of who they are and part of their life, this is something that you need to learn for the care of your health naturally, because all too often people are taking medication, or they're taking things like over-the-counter fiber just so they can go to the bathroom. But again, that's not fixing the problem, it's just aiding in the process. So because it has a toning effect on the colon, it aids in constipation and diarrhea, but it's helping to stimulate the body to heal itself. Okay, so now they know that the effects of what bitter herbs do is not just on the stomach, and it's not just limited in the stomach or what we call the gut system, our entire gut. So our gut is everything that we've been talking about up to now. They have found that there are bitter receptors in multiple organs and cells of the body, and that they're not just on the tongue. So we're talking about, when we started talking about bitter receptors, we were talking about when we eat foods and how the tongue detects what we're eating, whether it's those 5 tastes that we talked about, and then that determines what receptors get activated. But now they're saying that when you eat foods, it's not just about what happens on your tongue, but it's the entire process that it goes through your body also has their own receptors. So for instance, because it's found in multiple organs and cells, the gut, which we've been talking about, that itself now is its own tasting organ. So it's almost like your gut is now a tongue when you eat foods, and it picks up on these receptors itself. That's really interesting news. I don't know, I just think that's amazing. But I'm like probably the one person that's standing here right now that's like, this is the best news ever! And why it doesn't really matter, but for health reasons, this is huge, and where we're going with this is going to be an awesome opportunity for us to learn in the future. Now, we also had talked about how the bitter receptors do different things for different organs and cells. So, for instance, bitters regulate metabolism, so which plays a role in insulin resistance. Now, if you've ever been told that insulin resistance is something that you deal with, insulin resistance is basically pre-diabetes. So when you hear the word insulin resistance, it's a fancy word for saying you're on your way to becoming diabetic. So if you suffer from insulin resistance, just know that if you don't change something today and do it drastically, that's exactly where you're headed, is down the diabetic route. So bitters will regulate metabolism, which also plays a role in the insulin resistance, so prediabetes and diabetes. Now here's where bitter taste receptors are found so far. So again, they're still doing this research, and it's changing always. But as of today, right now, this is all the bitter receptors that they've found so far. In the thymus, which is in your brain, kidneys, epidermis, so your skin layers, olfactory cells, the thyroid, the heart, our urinary tract, inside our bone marrow. This is crazy. Inside our bone marrow, they're finding bitter receptors. Immune cells in the testes, the lungs, and in vascular smooth muscle. So just so far, that's where they found bitter receptors. They've only known bitter receptors to be on the tongue. And within just a few short years, they've found all these different organs and all these different cells in the body that now have these receptors. And what does that mean for our health in the future? And what does that mean for what we can do for health by using bitter herbs in the long run? So, here. Okay, so not all bitters are created equal. Some bitters work better than others, and how you use them works better than others as well. So for instance, it's better if you blend bitters together because they have a greater impact on the body. And in traditional Chinese medicine or in Ayurvedic medicine, what they talk about is using warm and cold things together. So in traditional Chinese medicine, they talk about like your yin and your yang and heat and cold and things like that. What you want to do is you want to make sure that you're mixing the two. You want to balance them out. So you don't want to just have what would be a cold bitter herb or a warm herb. You want to mix the two together. So for instance, a cold herb would be something like gentian, and a warm herb would be something like ginger. So you put those two together, and they become a powerhouse for the herbs together and for your system. So now key bitter herbs are gentian, wormwood, and feverfew. And these three together, if you put these three herbs together, you actually activate 12 out of those 29 receptors together. So those three herbs together will activate 12 of the 29 receptors. Now, you can activate almost all of them, but you have to be very, what's the word that I'm looking for? You have to know which ones they activate, and that's where the research is still into play. But what we do know now is that these three together give you a large amount, and then you tack on the different ones to add to that. So I had mentioned in the, can you do me a quick favor? Will you grab my flyer that was up there? Okay, so before we actually jumped on tonight and started this, I passed around a product for everybody. Thank you. I passed around a product for everybody to taste, which is called Digest Forte. Now, Digest Forte is a product by MediHerb, and essentially it's bitters. And so what we did is everybody that is here with me, we popped it open, we took one, we set it on our tongue. I had everybody just kind of hold it in their mouth for as long as they could until they tasted something. It kind of tastes, spicy? Would you say it was spicy when you first put it on your tongue? And then, like ginger? Okay. And then when the taste went away and it changed into a little bit of a bitter taste, then I said, okay, now y'all can swallow it. And they were happy about that. You actually don't have to do that, but you activate those receptors on the tongue faster if you do. So herbs have to break down in the stomach within 30 minutes in order for them to be activated and to do what they need to do. And with MediHerb, they in fact do break down in the stomach within that time frame. So I'm going to tell you real fast what's in here. So gentian is actually in here. Tangerine, so that's where you're getting the warmer. feverfew, ginger, that's what you tasted, wormwood, and then tangerine essential oil as well. Maybe probably a little bit for the flavor, I would say. But so these herbs in here activate a minimum of 12 of the taste receptors that are in your mouth. Now, another cool thing, and this is like going way back, and we don't really do this anymore. It's not typical for people to go to a restaurant and have a drink before they have dinner, or when people would have gatherings, it was common to have a drink before you had dinner, an aperitif. And so this is a product that is very popular amongst anybody that's ever been in a bar or worked in a bar. You know what bitters are, and this company has been around for many, many years. They actually make different flavors, but this one is the original, and this is the one that I'm going to talk about today because gentian is in this product. So something that my husband and I like to do when we go to a restaurant is, we're not drinkers, so what we do is we go and ask the server, do you have, if they have a full bar, we say to them, do you carry bitters here? And they usually go check and they come back and they say, yes, we do. And I'll say to them, can you just get a small, what is that small glass called? Not a highball. What is it? A rocks glass. A small glass. And larger than a shot glass though. And just ask them to put cold water into it. And then take about 3 to 5 drops of bitters and sprinkle it into the water and then just bring it back. And then after we've placed our order, while we're waiting for our food to come, we'll just take a couple sips off that. The great thing is it's free. They don't charge you to do that. But what they don't realize that they're doing for us is they're serving us bitters before we start our meal. And then that happens is our digestion actually starts kicking in then, and it's being primed. So it's our digestive system isn't actually digesting anything at that moment because we haven't eaten anything yet. But what it's doing is it's priming the body to digest our foods once we start actually eating. So to do something like that, this isn't going to fix anything, but it's just something that we do when we're on the fly, or if you tend to drink a lot of water during the day, just taking this and putting a couple drops into your bottled water. It starts to taste bitter, and it's not a lot, it's just a little bit, but over time you actually develop a taste for it. And when I say over time, I really only mean like within a couple days. I, for the most part, put it in my water at home all the time now, and it just has kind of become a habit for me. But then having the herbs, this is where the key is. This is the key herb because you're activating more receptors. That only has the gentian in it. And it has other ingredients, but it's a great thing to have when you're out and about, and you can, it's kind of like a party trick if you go out with people. Okay, so I have flyers for everybody to that you can take with you, and it tells you a little bit about the Digest Forte product that we're talking about, that we just talked about right now. But this is a standard cocktail ingredient that you can find at any restaurant. So if you don't have an option to pick up those bitter herbs from me or from your local practitioner, try this the next time you go to a restaurant or a bar, a place that has a full stock bar. Ask them, do you have bitters? And if they say yes, say, can you put a few drops into a glass with some water and bring it over to me? And I haven't been charged for it yet, but you'll see that I think it should be a thing. Like, we should start this trend where every time we go into a restaurant we ask them, and then pretty soon you'll find restaurants are automatically serving it as you come in. Rather than like bread and butter, they're just going to be serving bitter water to people as they go. Okay, so I think that is it. I think I shared everything that was on my topics to be discussed. Thank you so much for everybody that joined us on Periscope. Thank you to everybody that's here. We'll actually do a Q&A when I turn this off. If you have any questions, you can always contact us at Cartmel Chiropractic, and we will be on Periscope for the next 24 hours, and then once it dumps off of Periscope, we'll be over on our account on YouTube, which is Cartmel Chiropractic. That's CARTMELL Chiropractic, and thank you for joining us. As always, I appreciate it. I'm gonna move this now. Oops, now we're still on it.